Today's episode is sponsored by the Positively Living Co-working Club. If you're inspired by the topics here but struggle to take action, join us. The Co-working Club provides resources and accountability focused on doing, not networking. Obligers and introverts, this is for you. Get details and join for $20 a month at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
Shame is very much tied to judgment, and the counter to judgment is curiosity. So when we can activate the tool of curiosity, it's kind of like if you're holding one tool and you need to pick up another tool, you have to put that other tool down. So if you're holding the shame tool and you're like, you know what, I want to pick up the curiosity tool, you have to put the shame tool down. Even just switching into, let me ask some questions, can allow you to start putting that tool down. So rather than trying to change an emotional state, which is what most people are doing when they're talking about shame, recognize you're using a tool and pick up a different tool.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and it's been my mission for as long as I've been in business to help my clients release the shame they hold about so many things in their lives, perceived failures, the clutter in their lives, the habits they didn't keep, all of it. Shame doesn't serve us, or rather, it doesn't help move us forward like we think it does. And that's what we're going to talk about today with the help of my returning guest, Valerie Friedlander. Valerie is a professionally certified life and business alignment coach who helps passionate, high-achieving women create alignment with their work, in the world, their family, and themselves. She works with clients to listen to their intuition, shift conditioned mindset patterns, and take practical action steps to create a life that reflects the change they want to see in the world. She's also the host of the Unlimited podcast, which I have been on, and a wife, mom of two, a sci-fi fantasy nerd, and a creative spirit. Absolutely a multi-passionate and definitely our kind of people. You may recognize Valerie from conversations here about toxic positivity and other harmful mindset approaches. And today, we're heading back into mindset work to make sense of shame, learn what it really is, it's not just a feeling, and why we don't want it, as well as how to release it in order to build self-trust. I've listed Valerie's previous episodes in the show notes, along with a couple of other episodes she mentions in our conversation regarding early signs of burnout and motivating ourselves by meeting our needs. I encourage you to listen to those and welcome you to message me with your thoughts on this topic. Are these topics relevant to your challenges? Would you like to hear more about mindset work? You can message me on social media or go to the connect page of my website for a variety of ways to reach me. That's at positivelyproductive.com/connect. Now let's join Valerie. Valerie, my dear friend, welcome back to the Positively Living Podcast.
It is always a pleasure.
It's always a good conversation with you, and we've had a couple of them already on the podcast, and we're not done yet. We have such a good topic today, but before we dig into it, please share a bit about who you are, and my favorite part of the question is, what makes you light up?
Well, conversations with you. I'll answer that one first. and honestly, connecting with people, connecting with interesting people, having interesting conversations are always a highlight for me. I am a life business alignment coach. I work with a lot of women, particularly moms who are in periods of transition, not necessarily into motherhood, but sometimes it is into empty nesterness. Sometimes it's into retirement on one end, and sometimes it's in career change or what did somebody call it? Midlife career crisis. And so those shifts where it's not necessarily the career itself that's being focused on, but the ripple effects that a shift is going to have. So I do a lot of work around making sure that we have a grounded understanding of the self so that they have a solid foundation at which to make decisions from so that they feel really aligned in their decision making and thus more able to navigate any curveballs that come up as they make a shift. So that's what I do. I'm also a mom of two. Well, I should say 2 humans and 2 cats and a podcast. Kind of feel like that's parenting too.
Well, it's certainly like having a baby.
Yeah. It doesn't grow up and go off and do its own thing. I still have to nurture it all the time. But podcast called Unlimited and a creative spirit. I love all the creative things. I dabble in many things. I am a general dabbler and mucker, multi-passionate.
Yes, so it's really no wonder. Well, we are each other's people for sure. And what you said with the grounded understanding of the self, it feels good, that phrase to me. And self-awareness, I talk about that as being our number one productivity tool. And this is what you specialize in, is that understanding of self. And we've talked before on the podcast about harmful mindsets, and shame is certainly part of that. So that's what we want to talk about today. And this idea of we have the shame, we carry it, and we want to let go of it. And I think we know that we want to let go of it. And then we want to build a self-trust. So I would love to cover in not only what these things mean, but how they connect. So shall we start with addressing these terms so we don't have buzzwords flying around? What are we talking about? Let's start with shame, identifying what this is, where it comes from.
Shame is really, it's a tool. We think of it as an emotion. When we think about it as an emotion, we're like, we don't want this. We're like, let's not feel shame. Shame isn't helpful. But if we understand it as a tool, we understand why it's present, or at least an aspect of what makes it present. And that is, it is a tool that we have all learned to motivate ourselves. And that's why it's still present. So we say we don't want to, shame isn't helpful. It stops us from moving forward. There's a lot more talk about that, a lot more talk about like, that's not a useful thing. But most of us grew up with a conditioning around shame as motivation. What are you doing? Why would you do that? That's not what you should do. Because honestly, most of us aren't taught development. Like, we're not taught childhood development. We jump into parenthood in a society that is not really conducive to supporting parents and children. We don't have the kind of support systems that we need to be able to show up well as parents, let alone as a family and nurturing children. There's a great book called The Myth of Normal that Gabor Bante recently released, and he talks very much about like, we need to remove the shame, like everything that I'm talking about around the issues around parenting and how he doesn't say it like this, but like screw up our kids. You take away the shame from that because we are not given the support to be able to support our children well. And what happens is that we use the tool that we learned with our children. And so we pass that tool on. This is a way to motivate. What are you doing? Get yourself together. We're running late. Where are your shoes? Why don't you have your shoes on? What's going on? Even if we don't say the words, what's wrong with you, and we're really careful about it, the energy is there. Because we're in our survival mode and we're in our urgency and we're in our, oh, I should have done all these things. Even if you're not consciously thinking, I should have done all these things. Like, I should have asked them sooner. What am I doing wrong as a parent? Why can't we ever be on time? All of the internal stories that we have cultivated over many years based on our upbringing come into our energy with our kids. Like, no shame on that. It's important, and this is where we shift over into the self-trust piece. This is where we start to, rather than beating ourselves up for beating ourselves up, or beating ourselves up for having that kind of energy and having it come out, to be able to acknowledge what's going on, to be able to hold space for that, to care for ourselves, to essentially show ourselves the compassion that we wish that we could show to our children in these moments, and say, this is why this is happening. I'm using this tool to accomplish a thing, to motivate myself to do something. What am I trying to motivate? What am I trying to do? What's important to me here? And really interrogate it, because shame is very much tied to judgment, and the counter to judgment is curiosity. So when we can activate the tool of curiosity, it's kind of like if you're holding one tool and you need to pick up another tool, you have to put that other tool down. So if you're holding the shame tool and you're like, you know what, I want to pick up the curiosity tool, you have to put the shame tool down. Even just switching into, let me ask some questions, can allow you to start putting that tool down. So rather than trying to change an emotional state, which is what most people are doing when they're talking about shame, they're trying to change something that they don't really have control over consciously. Most of our emotions get released from our limbic system and go, oh, we need to feel this thing. There's danger here. We need to do this thing. Send off, whatever hormones. And we tell them the story about those hormones. And so rather than trying to stop shame as an emotion, which we then usually beat ourselves up over having, I shouldn't be shaming myself. That is a shoulding, right? As soon as we notice that, instead of trying to change the emotional state, recognize you're using a tool and pick up a different tool.
Mm-hmm. Oh my
Pick up
gosh.
the tool of curiosity. That's probably, there are probably other tools, but that one is just asking questions is probably the most readily available one, especially when you're feeling all the shame.
So you and I have that in common as questioners, and that works so brilliantly as coaches. We help our clients question. It's questioning on their behalf and then helping them lean into that, and questioning in a way that, as you said, is the curiosity, that then it's a different tool. I love this idea of a tool because it's a reminder to us, and a beautiful, compassionate reminder. That's like my favorite word as of late, because it's really what I lean into for productivity. But it's this idea that, okay, you needed to get a job done. So you picked up a tool. And I often will joke about, if everything looks like a nail, you're going to grab a hammer, right? And so this is fine tuning and saying, okay, that's fine. You grab the tool that you had, that you were taught, that you were given to by your family. And now you're realizing that's maybe not the best tool. What other one is there? That's a beautiful, compassionate way to come at it. And I think making that distinction between the emotion of it, which it's the feelings, oh my goodness, and then also that it is a tool. And then that's the very practical questioning side. So you've already helped us understand shame better, understand its connection to self-trust, and step one in terms of being able to release or use a different tool, if you will. Okay, so with shame being a tool, we're getting curious about that. And so I guess maybe I'd love for you to dig into the connection then to self-trust, and maybe even also why we want to use a different tool other than shame.
Yeah, that is a really important question, because it's served in a lot of ways. We've gotten this far with it. So I would just say, first off, starting with that is that it is a tool of oppression, whether it's individual or systemic oppression. That's what it is a tool for. So if that's not a good enough reason to put it down, to be able to recognize that it really doesn't move you. If we think about survival mode, we have, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze. I work with a lot of people pleasers, so they tend to be fawners. And what happens is they end up disconnecting from themselves. So when their stress response gets activated, which is what shame does, it activates our stress response. So we then act out of whatever our stress response is. So unless your stress response is fight, and even then it's still destructive, right? But if your stress response is any of the other ones, you're pushing further away from yourself. So self-trust is based in, if you think about what do you need in order to trust somebody, you generally want to know that they're being honest with you. You know that they're being truthful with you. You know that you can trust them to be what they say they are. And that speaks to integrity. I recently heard integrity tied to the term integer, because they're rooted in the same thing, integrity and integer. Integer is a mathematical term that means whole number. So integrity is essentially showing up with your whole self. So it's honoring your whole self. So to have self-trust, you need to be able to embrace your whole self. A lot of times people think that if I accept something, I'm saying it's okay. And that's not the case. Acceptance is acknowledging what is. It's not saying that what is okay. It's just acknowledging that it is. So when you can say, yes, I'm beating myself up, it's not saying, yeah, I want to keep beating myself up. Beating myself up works really well. It's saying, I am doing this. And then only once you acknowledge that you're doing it, can you go, okay, what do I need? Again, curiosity, asking the question, what do I need here? What could I do differently? To be able to acknowledge one's whole self, you have to be able to acknowledge where you are. Share what you know, admit what you don't know, be honest with where you are. That is hard and that is scary. And it is scary because sometimes that opens the door to additional realizations. Because we keep armor on not just to keep other people out, but also to protect ourselves. Vulnerability isn't just external vulnerability, it's also internal vulnerability, where we have to look at some of those deep, dark things, our shadow self, because that's part of our wholeness. So to be able to do that, we have to be able to be vulnerable with ourselves. Most of us didn't learn how to be vulnerable because the tool of shame was used with us, so it became unsafe. We're wired for belonging. I did a great interview with Amina Chaudhry, who does a lot of work around belonging and DEI in companies. And she's talking about we're wired for belonging. And that means that our survival mode kicks in when we feel a lack of belonging. And in our society, we're very much focused around it's not belonging, it's fitting in. So it's not being accepted for your full authentic self, your wholeness, but how well you fit in with the dominant structure, the systems, the norms. So this particularly comes up for a lot of women that I work with because a lot of times they're working in male-dominated spaces. And so there's this energy of you don't belong here. So we have to push ourselves harder. We have to, prove ourselves. And that disconnects us from who we are. And I know you talk a lot about this with like the productivity. I think you just did an episode relatively recently about, oh gosh, what was it? You were talking about the pressure to not care for ourselves. Like we need to do the things. It was on self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about how we need to give ourselves care first.
Yeah, I had an episode on motivating yourself by meeting your needs first. But there was also an episode about the early signs of burnout. And it is that curiosity that you're talking about where you say, what's going on with me here? And asking the question, is this okay? And what do I need? Those questions are so important. I don't think we ask them enough.
And so to that point, a lot of times we think it's a self thing when it's really a social thing. We are social creatures. We don't exist in a vacuum. We're wired for belonging. And if all we can get is fitting in, then we're going to prioritize that, which is where, if anybody's heard, it's very popular these days talking about attachment. We prioritize attachment over authenticity. And we are taught that from a very young age. So if you still don't feel safe, finding the places where you can feel safe to really hear yourself, to go into those wounds, to acknowledge them and to put down the armor. We need to find those spaces now as an adult self to be able to commune with our authentic self, to hear our wholeness. Because only once we can hear that can we actually show up with integrity and do what we say we want to do, which is what builds self-trust. When I say I will do a thing and then I do it, I tell myself that I can trust myself.
Yeah, but you're taking actions that prove that just as others may. But what you're talking about with, the distinctions of attachment and where we're coming from, the note that I made was that it's like a deep-coded need to protect ourselves. And so understanding that and then finding a way to, I guess, say to ourselves and understand and believe, no, I'm safe. I don't have to protect myself in that way. I can be authentic. When you were describing this idea of integrity and whole self, I was thinking authenticity right away, and then the distinction between authenticity and approval.
Mm-hmm.
And how, we default to the approval part. And you just explained why that need to protect, that need to belong. It's why safe spaces are so incredibly essential.
Absolutely. And it's hard to even step into those or to acknowledge those and to acknowledge the places where we don't belong, where we don't create safety because of the systems that we live in. Just our lived experience is not part of, we need people who can hear what we've experienced. So to be able to find those places, this is where companies have affinity groups. Those are intended, at least, or theoretically, to be safe spaces where people can talk about what's going on for them and their lived experience in the world. And it is something that we want to protect ourselves. We need to protect ourselves. And that's going to come out a lot more. Our survival mode is going to kick in a lot more when we don't feel protected. So when the spaces that we're in feel dangerous, when we feel the threat of being kicked out, it might not even be a current space. It might be an earlier space. This is, the traumas that we carry with us. I work with people who have workplace trauma, who, maybe they left a job and they're in this new job, but they're still feeling the vibration because of the stuff that they haven't healed and they haven't worked on from the previous workplace where they felt that threat. And so their system is more active. Like it's more on alert for the red flags, for the danger signs. It's looking for them. So then that's carried with them instead of, okay, how do we heal that? And how do we acknowledge what is present in this moment? I was working with somebody recently who, and this comes up a lot, of like, I need to be more confident. Something that's rewarded in this society is confidence more than competence, right? If you come off as confident and you jump into things, even if you don't have competence in the thing, but you are jumping in with confidence, then you are perceived as knowing what you're doing. And that is ultimately more rewarded. You're more likely to get the promotions. You're more likely to climb the ladder or, win in the system that we have. So the people who don't do that, the people who want to build a capability, like we don't actually feel confident. This is this other distinction between feelings and actions, right? We don't feel confident if we haven't done something. You can't be confident doing something if you haven't done it. So, and this goes to like self-trust too, like this idea of self-confidence. You're not going to feel self-confident until you have done the work to show yourself that you can trust yourself. And that might even be reflecting and going, yeah, I did the things. I didn't give myself credit for doing the things, but I totally did the things. It's not always that it's something in the future. Sometimes it's a reflection on the past that you obscured. When we talk about invisible labor, a lot of times we don't see our own labor.
Yeah.
It's not just other people not seeing our labor. It's us not seeing our own labor. So sometimes it's the reflection work to go, oh yeah, no, I'm acknowledging myself. So I'm seeing my wholeness, not just the part that is accepted in the world, that gets lauded, that gets credit, but I'm seeing the whole me and all the things that I do and am. Sometimes what we're really looking for is building capability and having courage to step into something, but also to recognize that your process, as it was with this client, they prefer to build competence before they step out and say, yes, I'm going to do this. Unfortunately, that isn't as rewarded. So they weren't seeing the movement in their company that they would have liked to see, but they weren't willing to sacrifice their process that felt good to them to be able to really feel good in what they were saying before they said confidently, I feel good in what I'm saying. But a lot of this has to do with even just being part of a friend group when they were younger and then getting kicked out and being told you don't belong. You don't get to stay with us. You're on your own. And that trauma, I mean, and it's a small t trauma, but a small t trauma is an impact on our self-understanding. It is a reduction of how we understand ourselves. That's small t trauma versus like a traumatic experience or event. So something that reduced who we understood ourselves to be. And that experience carried over to being much more hypervigilant about not getting kicked out of the group, whether that group is a place of employment or a friend group. Sometimes it's hard to find these things if you're not working with somebody, asking the questions to go deep enough. But even if you can't work with somebody at this particular time, finding those safe spaces to be able to explore who you are and see yourself really makes a difference in terms of reducing the shame. Oh, I'm not the only one. Other people do this too. That was huge for me. I have to say, so I would go to Al-Anon meetings. It's groups for people who are impacted by the family disease of alcoholism. And when I was handed the list of adult children of alcoholic, like characteristics of adult children of alcoholics, and I read through that and I was like, oh my gosh, you mean enough people do this? They wrote it down? It was such a relief. I could see myself more clearly instead of feeling like, oh, this is a personal defect. This is something that a lot of people experience who have similar experiences to me. It's not that something's wrong with me or something's broken in me. This is part of who I am, and I get to choose how I move forward. That self-acceptance goes a long way to being able to then take the actions to build self-trust. And shame and self-acceptance do not go hand in hand.
It's interesting to me, and I might be wrong on this, but the way that I see it is it's almost like these safe spaces and communities where we can talk and we can share and we can realize I'm not the only one, is using a form of belonging to release the shame. So it's using another tool and a desire that we have in order to do that. So it's heartening to me to know that my desire to do this for others, to the point that I share a lot of my mess. Yes, I'm a productivity coach. Yes, I understand time and space management and self-management and habits. I have a lot of tools. I teach them really well, and I screw up all the time. And also life's me, right? It's not just me. We were talking in the green room and you're like, yeah, I overschedule. Wait, no, that would be the school doing that to me. Like it's not always us, but we make the choices. We make the choices based on how we function and what we value. And it's okay. But I do share a lot of the chaos that is and can be my life because I think it's so important in the conversation of productivity and the value that we place around that.
Yeah, we don't exist in a vacuum either.
No.
We are also human. I actually just talked about this on an episode of my podcast about how we have this tendency to pedestal people. And by doing that, we ascribe them an inhuman quality because we're only seeing one aspect of them because they're human beings. And when we muffle their humanity by pedestaling them, and it's not to say you can't admire somebody for something they're doing, but when the cult of personality, like we put them up and like, this is the way to be and this is what you should do, and we obscure the reality of humanness, we start to do that to ourselves. Certain things about us become bad. They become unworthy. They become undesirable. Instead of holding on to our whole humanity, saying, you know what, I'm navigating this world just like everybody else. And I'm doing it with the tools that I have and the understandings that I have and the resources that I have access to, the privileges that I have or that I don't have. So to be able to hold on to that wholeness, we can meet ourselves where we're at and build our trust in our own self. Like we're going to be honest with ourselves. We're going to be willing to take a look at what's really going on and not take on responsibilities that aren't ours. We talk about the school thing and the overscheduling thing. It was important for me to look at, oh my God, why do I do this to myself? Like this is where I start going into like, I have overscheduled. I'm doing too much. Why do I keep doing this? And go, well, hold on. What part of this is mine? What did I choose? What did I say yes to? And what was not in my control? So like how the school schedules, how the school communicates, all of those things are not in my control. I have the privilege of being able to choose to be flexible after school hours so that I can be there for my kids and I can, oh, there's a meeting today. Okay, I'm there. There's a field trip. Okay, I'm there. I get to choose that. And maybe at a certain point that might not work for me for both internal and external reasons. But to be able to go, okay, I chose to be unpredictable because I chose to say, I'm going to say yes to the school things that are needed. Partly for me, because I know that there are other people who cannot do that, who do not have that flexibility. And so I choose to show up to meetings to be a voice for the people who can't actually be there in person. I talk to them, I get that input, and then I show up so that I can make sure that there's representation for them there. I choose to have that dynamic. I could choose not to. Being able to recognize what part am I choosing, so what part do I have control over versus what part am I not choosing, allows me then to assess what my actual capacity is and where I can shift things.
And sometimes just the perspective, because I could be in a situation where it's like, this is too much. And then I can also say, no, I've chosen this and these are the reasons why I've chosen it. And it sort of adjusts my mindset around it. How I perceive it, I should say. It adjusts the lens in which I see it, which is like, that's a bit on the busy side, but I'm okay with it because I said yes for these reasons and I believe in that. It changes my energy around it.
I use less energy. It takes me out of survival mode. And, it's what empowerment is. So it's acknowledging where I have power and being able to acknowledge when I'm actually spending. I can go, well, you know what? I'm spending an awful lot here, more than I realized. I am going to continue to choose this. So I need to give myself a little bit more room here.
Right. And then that's prioritizing. So again, it all comes down to choice. And you're right. That is extremely empowering. Okay, so I really like this, what part of it is mine and the choice. Some other notes that I've made as we wrap up with the idea of, okay, well, what do we do with this information today? Where do we go? I like this idea of picking up the curiosity tool, because simply by doing that, it allows us, even for a moment, to release the weight of the shame tool. Understanding, just walking away going, oh, I have different tools that I can choose from. That awareness alone is a beautiful gift to ourselves. So picking up the curiosity tool is one of them. And then the other one we talked about is finding a safe space. So we can practice that. Oh, you go through this too. So, well, if we're all going through this, then why have shame around it? Why not allow acceptance, which, as you pointed out, is not the same as approval. It's simply allowing for this acknowledgement of reality.
And it can be just one other person. I mean, ideally, you have a community. Ideally, we all have community. That's very difficult in the world we live in right now with how busy everything is. And to be able to make that room to meet with somebody who can hold space, right? So maybe it's not like I understand, but I hear you, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's like, yeah, I go through that too. It could be someone who can just hold the space, especially, but also if you are not able to give yourself that compassion, someone who can help you access self-compassion by having it for you, because sometimes it's hard to access that. And again, I work with a lot of people who have a lot of self-awareness, and what they end up doing is they use the self-awareness tools to beat themselves up with. Like I had a client recently who was like, I shouldn't have expectations. I've done everything I can, but I'm going into this fair with, I just don't know what's going to happen. It could be terrible weather. People might not show up, but I've worked so hard, but I know I shouldn't have expectations. And I'm like, I'm not sure this is expectations. Because she was beating herself up for having expectations. I know better. I shouldn't have this. And it's like, I'm hearing hope. Expectations are like, I think it's going to go a particular way, and I'm attached to the way it's going to go, that it goes this way and it should go this way. But why would you do this if you didn't hope that it would go a particular way? And of course, you're worried that your fears are going to come true. Like you're worried that your hopes will be dashed. Who wants their hopes dashed? Nobody.
That's not on my list.
Right? I mean, yeah, sign me up. Hopes dashed? Yeah. So of course you have hopes. If you didn't have hopes, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't sign up to share your gift at this fair if you didn't hope that it went well. like maybe it's just looking at it like it's not expectations that it's going to go well. It's hope that you've done everything you can and that it's going to be received. She's like, oh my gosh, I guess I don't need to beat myself up with it. I'm like, no.
Yeah, a little too much knowledge sometimes,
Yeah.
but again, it comes back to compassion.
And that's why we need people.
Really great point that it can be one person. And yes, it could be a coach, it could be a friend, one person to truly hold space, whether or not they have actual empathy, whether or not they're going through it, if they can be there and say, I see you, I hear you. Oh, that's a beautiful start for releasing shame.
And that's one of the things we do is build trust from there, releasing the shame so that you can actually hear yourself, your wholeness, and set reasonable actions for yourself with where you really are. And it's like going to a gym and saying, like, I want to lift 500 pounds. I haven't lifted at all, or I haven't lifted in 5 years, but I'm going to go lift 500 pounds. No, you're not. We build slowly to that based on where you are, right? The trainer is going to look at where you actually are, what you're, without harming yourself, able to handle, and set a plan to build that muscle if that's what you want to do. So yeah, of course you're going to, you're not going to build self-trust if you come in without an awareness of where you actually are, trying to do something that really is not within the capacity that you have. And too often that's what we're doing, is we're using shame to motivate ourselves to be able to do something that actually doesn't fit us. And so we erode self-trust when we can meet ourselves where we're at and be honest with ourselves about that, including that we were using a shaming tool that we were given because that's what we were taught to use. Then we can, okay, step 1 is put the tool down, pick up a different tool. Okay. Step 2 is then, exploring and actually, step 1 is noticing that you're using the shaming tool. Step 2 is giving yourself some compassion around the fact that you were using it. And like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just how you were conditioned. Step 3 is then putting it down. See, so often there's like way more steps than we realize when we first start.
Exactly. Which is why if your first step today is, oh, this is what's happening, then go ahead and celebrate that, because the more awareness you have and the more you can take one step at a time, the better off you'll be. This is a beautiful place for us to wrap up. We do have a little bonus wrap up at the end, as you already know. But before we dig into that, let us know where we can find you online. The Unlimited podcast is one. And where else can we find you and your resources, Valerie?
My website, which is valeriefriedlander.com. And I do have a number of free resources, worksheets to explore things on my website. So you can just check that out and download whatever you feel called to download. And then I'm on various social medias like Instagram and LinkedIn, but I'm not a big fan of social media. So I'm kind of here and there. And usually when I go on, I'm kind of encouraging people to leave.
I just go on looking for my safe space friends like you.
Yes.
That's that we pretty much congregate together and just try to lift others up and then just say, just let it go.
Yeah. But I do check my messages on there and things like that. So if anybody wants to send me a message, I am always happy to hear from folks.
Okay. Now with our rapid wrap up, it's 3 things that we're looking for today that inspire your positively living: a song, a saying, and a resource. So let's start with the song.
I'm going to go with Jimmy Eat World's The Middle.
Yes, I like that song.
It came out ages ago, but it didn't come out in time for when I really needed it. And we recently went to go see them in concert, and it was like, yes.
Love that song. Okay. How about a saying, a mantra, a quote?
I really like the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
And that's beautiful with our conversation around acceptance, right? And growth, for that matter.
Yeah.
Okay. And how about a resource? You did mention a book already. If there's another one that you want to mention, it could be an app, a book, you name it, that just really adds to positively living for you.
I really like Gabor Mate's book. It's big and it's kind of hefty to go through. I have recently found Tara McMullen's book, What Works, to have some great questions and just really awesome information to kind of understand some of the dynamics that are pulling at us and how to engage them. It's amazing. So I'm going to say that book right now.
I will make sure that both of those books are on the Positively Living podcast resources list. It's an Amazon list. You can find it on the positivelyproductive.com/resources page. So if you're looking for those, that's where you can find them. Now, last, but certainly not least, let's share some gratitude together. And I've learned over time, I would always ask, what are you grateful for? But instead, I'm going to say, what or who contributes to positively living for you, Valerie?
I'm going to say my husband. His willingness to lean into new understandings and to acknowledge when he's not showing up the way he would like to and out of alignment with his own values, and to step into learning to do better and admitting, and also his willingness to release things. We recently had a situation where he stood up and spoke to a situation that he saw that was not fair, that it was not okay. And it meant speaking up to a group of people that he was close with. And he's since lost that group of people. And it's bringing a lot of grief up and a lot of awareness of some things that he's having to look at. And it's hard. Of course, it's bringing up past friend stuff. And it's just, it's tough. But the fact that he's willing to do that because of his values, and that he, and to be the person that he wants to be in the world, I have so much respect for that. And it makes the world feel a little bit less lonely for me to have a partner who is willing to lean into disruptive values.
Aw, that's beautiful. I love that. And, having that kind of support in a partner and seeing that openness and that willingness to grow and to be challenged in that way, that's a beautiful thing.
And I also have a lot of gratitude for you. We don't always talk as much as we used to, but I always love our conversations, and it always feels good. When you're in a space where you feel seen and held and connected. And I always feel that when we have conversations. So I just want to express a lot of appreciation for you in that.
Thank you, Valerie. I blame the school for us. No, but it's the quality of our time together. And always, always, I'm so grateful for you. And you have so much to share, and you share it so freely. You shine your light so brilliantly in this world. And I'm honored that you shared it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.